Hi everyone, welcome to Music is a Journey. I'm Peter. I am going to jump on this thread here that came out from Tommy's Music Adventure. This was a new channel to me. I've subscribed though, and sounds very interesting because, hey, music adventure, music is a journey. I think we're thinking along similar lines. So Tommy put out a video for a Gimme Five thing, and that was like, give me 5 great debut albums. I might have let this one go because, as you may or may not know, I'm in the middle of my Japanese shoegaze series. Well, not in the middle. I finished the first video. I've got 2 more to go. I'm 1/3 of the way through. And I didn't want to interrupt it, but this was too tempting because I also had in mind to do a video of debut albums. My video was going to be a little bit different. It was going to be debut albums that sound nothing like the rest of the band's catalog. This is just exactly that. Bands started out doing one thing and then just changed and went off in a different direction. Now, there are a lot of albums we could talk about, like the first album by Genesis or the first Pink Floyd album, various others. But part of it was Tommy's asking us for great debut albums. Now, of course, that's subjective. Anyone can say that a particular debut album that I think is great is not so great, and one that I don't think is so great, they think is great. But anyway, I'm going to say ones that I think are great, even though I might like other albums in the catalog better. And the other thing that Tommy is saying is he wants debut albums by a band that have put out more than 5 albums. So no like debut where that was the only album. Or like, you know, Captain Beyond with a great debut album, but they only ever had 3 albums. So we're not doing that. All right, so let's get started on this here. The first album I'm going for is Smeared by Sloan. You probably know Sloan are one of my top 3 favorite bands ever. And this album here, they came from the Halifax underground. They were hardcore influenced. They were probably doing stuff kind of like Dinosaur Jr., Husker Du, Sonic Youth, whatever, around the time. And then one of the band members heard My Bloody Valentine's Loveless and said, hey, listen to this. And everybody was like, that's cool. We're going to try to do something like that. So what we have here is a marriage of this Halifax underground, late 80s, early 90s underground sound with a shoegaze sound to it. And after that, the band would strip away the shoegaze style, strip away all the distortion, and move on in a new direction. And actually, they almost got canned from the David Geffen label because they said, re-record your second album. We want it to sound like the first one. And they said, no. And David Geffen label said, well, then we're not supporting it. But anyway, this sounds nothing like the rest of the band's catalog. And people who got into Sloan later on do not really care so much for this album. They say the songwriting is not really as well developed and is too much of a loveless worship on here. But this is how I first heard about the band back in '93, and I still love this album. It's great. Similar, Spirit of the West. You might have heard them from their Save This House album, or maybe from their famous song Venice is Sinking, the song that actually, I think, got attention in the United States, when they were more of an alternative rock band fused with Celtic type music. However, this was when they were a Celtic type music, folk type band. So acoustic guitars, mandolins, hand percussion, Scottish hand percussion, flutes, that kind of thing. Very, very different. And the initial 3 members here, one of them, I think, is this fellow here, Jay Knutson. He would leave the band after this album. Hugh McMillan would join, and the band would start to add more electric sound to their music, like electric guitars, clean, sometimes distorted, still keeping the sound similar to this. But after that, they would rapidly evolve. And so if you were into your late 80s, early 90s Spirit of the West, and you went back to this, is quite different. Now, they did actually have a debut on an indie label before that. That is, forget it. You know, if you find it somewhere, good for you. But some of the songs from that are available on this album, Old Material, 1984 to 1986, which includes 5 songs from the debut, independent debut, and 5 songs from a live album. So yeah, this is actually containing half of their original debut. This is the official debut on Stony Plain. Very, very different. Great album, though. I've always loved this one. Here we go. April Wine, the Foot album from 1971, self-titled debut. This album here, the only member that April Wine fans will probably recognize if you're a fan of their 70s, mid to late 70s, early 80s music, that is Miles Goodwin, whom we lost just last year in the fall. The other people in the band, we've got two brothers on here. Sorry, I think it's John Hanneman and his brother, and then their cousin. So the cousin left after this album, and after the second album, the two brothers left. So by the third album, we had only Miles Goodwin left. This album doesn't sound like anything from their later albums. There are two songs in here by Miles Goodwin that probably are the closest to what you would hear later, but nah. If you've got your Nature of the Beast album, or The Whole World's Going Crazy album, or Faster, Harder album, and then you go back to this, it's quite different. A lot of longer tracks, sometimes going into different directions here. I think some of it was like stream of consciousness songwriting, not so much of the straight up hard rock style that we would hear later on. So that's April Wine's debut. Scorpions' Lonesome Crow. This was a completely different band, basically. Yes, you had your Rudolf Schenker and your Klaus Meine. Yes, we had Michael Schenker on here. But after this album came out, kind of a krautrock album, bit of jazziness to it, some longer pieces, some songs that keep changing and changing. Not like your 1980s Scorpions by any means. Even your late 70s Scorpions sounds very different from this. And of course, after this, the band would tour with UFO, and then they snatched up Michael Schenker, took him away, and Scorpions folded up. That was it. The only reason why they continued as the Scorpions was because Rudolf Schenker went to his friend Uli John Roth, joined his band Don Road, and Uli said, bring in your singer from the Scorpions, Klaus Meine. And then he said, you know what, Scorpions have more of a popular name because they had an album and a video. Don Road never did, so let's change the name to Scorpions. And that's how we got the Scorpions. That moved on, evolved on to be the Scorpions that we have known ever since. So yeah, very different sounding album. I had some classmates in the mid-80s who loved Blackout and Love at First Sting and Savage Amusement. And I remember one day I said to a friend, listen to this. And he put on the headphones and listened. He was just like, no. But I've always loved this album. I think it's very interesting. And Lonesome Crow is really cool. In Search of Peace of Mind is a great song. Michael Schenker wrote it, I think he said, when he was 16. And still he thinks is one of his great pieces. I'm Going Mad is also cool. So really interesting album. And finally, if Chris Prophy hasn't talked about this already, this is Rockarola, 1974 debut by Judas Priest. What makes this album so different from the others is that the material on here is basically all the material that was written under the Al Atkins era, when Al Atkins was the singer. And so, you know, after he left, he gave the blessing for the band to continue without him. They got in Rob Halford. Later on, they got in Glenn Tipton, and then they recorded this album. So most of the songs, if not all of them, that you hear on here are from the Al Atkins period. After this, of course, they would start writing new material. There was still a little bit left over from Al Atkins on Sad Wings of Destiny, but a lot of it was new stuff written with Rob Halford and Glenn Tipton involved as well. So very different. If you love your Stained Glass, Metal Gods, British Steel, Scream You for Vengeance, Painkiller, Judas Priest, this is very different. This is your, as Al Atkins put it, your blues-based, heavy progressive rock Judas Priest. Okay, and that's it. That's my video for 5 debut albums that I think are really great, but at the same time, 5 debut albums that sound distinctly different from the rest of the band's catalog. All right, thank you for watching. Link to Tommy's original video in the video description of this video here. My next video, gonna get back on track with that Japanese shoegaze series. So thanks for watching. See you around, folks. Bye.